For our foundational learning module, this video will be about really focusing on the research and then also the introduction to MBSEL practices. So for our objectives, we will be able to identify how research supports both mindfulness and SEL. We will understand that importance of maintaining secularity within schools when especially integrating mindfulness. You'll gain an overview of the best practices as well as healing-centered practices with MBSEL, and then an introductory to those practices, as I had mentioned. So for our research, I had compiled a couple of different powerful research studies that you may want to explore a bit deeper. We're not going to go in the nitty-gritties of the research together. However, I want to highlight some of those main findings that we know for sure. So these are from mindfulschools.org. There's a whole section for research, as well as castle.org and their whole section with research. So basically, the research is very clear as of this point, and research continues, but the research is showing that there's an increase in academics, there's an increase in positive behavior choices, there's an increase in the ability to sustain focus and to be fully present for school, and overall just an increase in that compassion and empathy as well, as we know, and a reduction in stress and anxiety. And given all of the different dynamics in our world, these practices together are going to be essential and are essential for our learners and ourselves. So moving into, again, the importance of secularity. Now, there's a couple highlights here as well that I want to share with you. And please take some time to dig a bit deeper in understanding how you can integrate mindfulness in a secular way. So the first is understanding the considerations for different worldviews and different experiences. We are all coming from different backgrounds. And so depending on different worldviews will depend on the experience that somebody has had. So we need to be able to hold space and honor those experiences. And also, this is why there's an importance of bringing the family and community connection along with us and educating together how we view mindfulness in the school setting, which may be different in other settings, but there are very specific things that we want to ensure in our school setting to maintain that secularity. So, and think about that. So maybe in your notes, take a moment to just write down how you can continue to facilitate learning for families and the community as you are sharing different practices within your school or within your classroom. And thinking about the appreciation and appropriation. Again, I want to just mention this here, but this is something to really explore as well. So I did bring an example. So in many mindfulness spaces, you may see different types of instruments, especially for practices called mindful listening. And so with that, we need instruments that can have a sound that resonates. So sometimes in different spaces, you may see what's called a singing bowl. Now, we want to be aware of, well, what is the background of the singing bowl and what does this mean? And are there different cultural components within this singing bowl that are very special to particular cultures? And for some, is it connected to any religious practices? And so we want to be aware of if there might be connections and appreciate the culture. But we might not want to use particular tools if there might be a symbol behind that for our families that we're with and communities that we're with, and honoring that symbol with it. So we have to be thinking that sometimes it's more than just an instrument, right? So this may not be the best instrument to use in schools, but you have to know your community. But also you can use this as a learning opportunity and share and celebrate instruments of different cultures. So again, be aware and know your community. However, there might be an alternative like this, right? Some of you have maybe seen a wooden chime. And so this might be more appropriate in your settings because it can't be misunderstood as a religious symbol. So be aware, and that was just one example, right? And just knowing your communities. Okay, so I want to then move into those 3 bullet points down at the bottom. 2 of them are about understanding the law and what protects ourselves and students for the freedom of practicing religion, and also making sure that religion is out of education, that everything is completely secular. Okay, so one is understanding the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. And the second is the Lemon versus Kurtzman in 1971, which then created what was called the Lemon Test. And to explore further, I would, again, highly recommend reading chapter 11. It is an amazing chapter. There are guiding questions to help you think through, like, is what I'm choosing to use in my classroom maintaining secularity? And so that chapter is called Secularity, Guiding Questions for Inclusive Mindfulness and Yoga in Schools. An amazing chapter. I use that as a guide as well. So take a moment and write down anything that you would like to remember or to refer back to before we move into the next part here. And you can always pause the video at any time if you need more time. And then taking a breath in and a breath out, creating that space as we move into here. So this is something that we wanted to share with you about having the best practices in general for social and emotional learning, and then the heart-centered, healing-centered, or it might be your trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive, however you wish to look at that through, but for mindfulness. Because we need to make sure that these elements are included and honored within what we share in our spaces in education. So for SEL, it is explicitly taught instruction. It's not just reading a book. It's not just being nice and kind, though those are wonderful and maybe can connect to your instructional practices. But SEL are the explicitly taught skills. After learning those skills, there is that explicit practice, there's strategic feedback, there's the embedded opportunities throughout the day, throughout instructional content of being able to practice that in the moment as well. And it's practiced over time. It's not just a one and done or for 1 week or a little bit. These are those skills that keep coming back. And in regards to mindfulness, we want to be providing these safe spaces because sometimes, depending on experiences and layering in that layer of trauma, which you'll learn in another module as well, but just making sure we have this overview of understanding that mindfulness and practicing mindfulness is an invitation. It's an option. It's a choice. And at any time, a student can opt in and opt out. So making sure you have other options for them. Maybe they have a journal that they can always have nearby if they choose not to engage in the mindfulness practice. We're using choice language, meaning you can have your hands down to your side, you can have your hands on your belly, or wherever is comfortable for you. So you're giving those choices within the practice to create that sense of security and ownership. Realizing with our eye gaze that sometimes having our eyes closed can be a very scary place for some people. So we want to give options there too, whether they're open or closed or looking at a focal point nearby or anything else that makes sense for our learners. Noticing the environment in which you are sharing your mindfulness experiences with. Knowing, are there relationships strong within your community to be in that vulnerable place of sharing that space together? And you're sharing your hearts, right? As you're learning these practices from the inside out, as well as the outside in through SEL. I want to mention just a few more here, where this one here in regards to the awareness of breath retention. Again, thinking about trauma, when we have that response, a traumatic response, often we constrict and retain our breath. So when we're sharing some of our practices, sometimes we tell students to hold their breath. That may not be a safe place. So be aware of that and know your students, know your community. And also developmentally, it may not be the best practice for our younger students for holding their breaths with their lung development. We shared about alternative options. And then finally, yes, being an observer, noticing how your students are in that space, noticing if they're becoming fidgety or uncomfortable, and allowing any moment for them to stop the practice. So just become that aware observer of the space. And so when we put these practices together, that's when we have mindfulness-based SEL. So as you're planning for your lessons and your instruction later on, maybe refer back to this and maybe do a little bit of a checklist, like, okay, like, do I have these different elements? So let's move into the practice. So you're really going to have two practices, but they're combined into one, and you'll see what I mean by that. So one practice that I have created and have been sharing is called the 5-step moment, because it allows you the opportunity to facilitate a mindful moment anytime, anywhere, and always have the different elements for a complete experience. And so what we have here is our aqua hand. And this is actually your left hand. So I want you to take a look at your left hand and go ahead and put your thumb up, and I want you to say settle in. Then your next is check in, repeating back. Your next is moment. Your next is check out. And your next is close out. And so what you'll be able to do is at any moment, you'll be able to be like, okay, I'm going to guide my students or my staff members to settle in, meaning where and how do they want to be in that space? Do they want to sit or stand? Do they want their eyes open or closed, or however that makes sense? Then they're going to check in with their body, breath, emotions, and thoughts, whatever is present today. The moment is where you have that creative option. So our moment today is going to be the other practice, which is called breath as anchor. But this moment, you get to choose whatever that may be. And then after the moment, you then check out with your body, breath, emotions, and thoughts. Then you close out and welcome everyone back, and maybe looking around the room, opening up their eyes, just reacclimating back to the space, ready to learn, ready to be. Okay. So I'm going to model this for us, and you can get this visual off of my website, as well as a script and other resources, which will be linked in the resources section for you. So let's go ahead and engage in our moment. Oh, before we do, for our focus for the moment is breath as anchor. And what this is you're going to notice that throughout this course, you're going to get different anchors. So for some people, as we shared for the healing-centered approaches, breath may not be a safe place, but it is such a powerful place for many people, and hopefully be able to work through that healing space to get to an opportunity to be aware of the breath. So what this allows us to do is to be fully present in the moment and watch our breath. Notice our breath. Notice where it moves. Where is it at in the body? Is it low? Is it stuck? Does it connect? Does it flow? So we're going to observe that together as our moment. Okay? And not changing, not judging, just observe. All right, let's try this.